In a forgotten contract buried beneath stacks of dusty files in a law firm's archive, there was a peculiar clause. No one noticed it. No one thought it mattered. But that single overlooked provision would become the fuse for a meticulously hidden revenge, where an ordinary woman transformed her deepest betrayal into the weapon that built her empire. Sometimes the most dangerous things aren't hidden at all. They're just waiting in plain sight for someone clever enough to see them. My name is Madeline Crowley, Maddie to the few who still bothered with pleasantries, and at 32, I'd become invisible in the most visible way possible. Every morning, I arrived at Halberg and Denton LLP's gleaming tower in downtown Port Charles, Ohio, at precisely 7:15 a.m., 30 minutes before the senior partners, 2 hours before their cocaine confidence wore off from the previous night's client dinners. The security guard never looked up anymore. The receptionist had stopped learning my name 3 years ago. I was furniture that filed contracts. The 43rd floor hummed with the particular frequency of legal misery. Fluorescent lights that gave everyone a corpse-like pallor, the persistent clicking of keyboards like rats in walls, and the smell of burnt coffee mixed with someone's forgotten lunch rotting in the communal fridge. My office, if you could call a converted supply closet an office, sat at the building's intestinal end, where they kept the mid-level contract attorneys who did the real work while partners took boats out on Lake Erie. That Tuesday started like every other Tuesday in my 6 years of legal purgatory. Graham Tolland, senior partner and professional credit thief, had dumped a banker's box on my desk at 11 p.m. the night before via his assistant. He never came himself, probably afraid mediocrity was contagious. Inside, 300 pages of a real estate acquisition contract for the Meridian development. A deal worth somewhere north of $200 million. The sticky note on top, in Graham's pretentious fountain pen scrawl, "Clean this up. Meeting at 9 a.m. tomorrow." Clean this up? Like I was a janitor for other people's legal incompetence, I'd spent the night cross-referencing every clause, every addendum, every footnote that Graham's Harvard law degree apparently hadn't prepared him to handle. The coffee had gone cold around 2 a.m. My eyes burned from screen glare by 4 a.m. By 6 a.m., I'd found it, buried in subsection 47C, insert-wise, of the financial provisions, nested between standard boilerplate about force majeure and arbitration procedures. The clause was beautiful in its obscurity, written in the kind of dense legalese that made most people's eyes glaze over. In the event of involuntary dissolution or bankruptcy proceedings initiated against the secondary party within 18 months of contract execution, all residual profit interests, including but not limited to appreciation rights and carried interest provisions, shall automatically vest in the primary signatory's designated subsidiary vehicle, notwithstanding any contrary provision herein. Translation: if the partner company went belly up, someone had just written themselves a golden parachute worth millions. I sat back in my squeaking office chair, the one with the broken wheel that IT kept promising to fix, and stared at that clause. In 6 years, I'd seen plenty of aggressive contracts, even predatory ones. But this was different. This was a trap dressed as typography, a financial landmine hidden in plain sight. The morning sun was starting to pierce through Port Charles's permanent smog when I heard Graham's voice booming down the hallway. All artificial confidence and Armani suit. "Where's my contract review? The Meridian people will be here in 20 minutes. I looked at the clause again, then at Graham's name on the partner directory outside my closet office, gold-plated and gleaming. I thought about the promotion I'd been promised for 3 years running, always delayed because the timing wasn't quite right, or the partnership needed to see more billable hours, even though I'd billed more than any other mid-level attorney for 4 straight years. My finger hovered over the clause. I could flag it, save the firm from potential disaster, be the hero who caught what everyone else missed. Maybe this time they'd notice. Maybe this time it would matter. "Crowley." Graham's voice was closer now. "Don't make me look bad in there. Don't make him look bad." As if he'd ever done anything but take credit for my work, my research, my sleepless nights fixing his mistakes. as if I existed for any purpose other than making him look competent. I closed the contract. "It's ready," I called out, standing with the bound document. "Everything's in order." Graham snatched it from my hands without looking at me, already turning toward the conference room where I could see the Meridian team settling in through the glass walls, the kind of transparency that was purely architectural. "Good," he muttered, then paused. "And Crowley? Next time, don't cut it so close." I watched him stride away, contract under his arm, that hidden claws tucked between the pages like a sleeping virus. At the time, I thought I was just tired, burned out, maybe even petty. I had no idea that clause would become the foundation of everything that came after. I had no idea it would become my salvation. 3 weeks passed before I touched that contract again. The Meridian deal had closed smoothly. Champagne in the conference room, Graham's name in the legal Times, my existence unmentioned as always. But something about that clause gnawed at me like a splinter working deeper under skin. I started staying late again. But this time, not for Graham's assignments. After the office emptied and the cleaning crew finished their rounds, I'd slip into the records room with my keycard and a flashlight app. Halberg and Denton kept physical copies of everything, an old-school paranoia that partners claimed was about security, but really meant they didn't trust digital footprints. The Meridian contract sat in box 47M, third shelf from the top. I photographed every page with my phone, then spent hours at home tracing the money trail. The designated subsidiary vehicle mentioned in the clause led to a shell company in Delaware, Portside Holdings LLC. From there, the ownership structure split into 3 more shells, each one registered exactly 18 days apart, each one listing the same registered agent. But it was the timing that made my stomach turn. Every shell company had been created 4 months before the Meridian deal was even proposed. Someone had been planning this for half a year, maybe longer. They knew Meridian's subsidiary, Coastal Logistics, was hemorrhaging money. They knew bankruptcy was inevitable, and they'd structured this entire acquisition to profit from that collapse. I pulled Coastal Logistics' financial statements, public record, but nobody ever looked. Their debt-to-equity ratio was a disaster. Their accounts receivable were mostly phantom invoices from companies that barely existed. Within 18 months, probably less, they'd be filing Chapter 11. And when they did, that innocuous clause would trigger, transferring millions in profit rights to Portside Holdings. The question was, who owned Portside? I spent another week following the corporate maze, using every database access I hadn't yet been locked out of. The trail led through Nevada, Wyoming, back to Delaware, then finally to a trust. The Tolland Family Trust. Graham. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. This wasn't just aggressive lawyering or sharp negotiation. This was engineered destruction. Graham had structured the entire deal knowing, planning for Coastal Logistics to fail. He'd probably even recommended them as the subsidiary partner, sold it to Meridian as a strategic advantage. I printed everything, every corporate filing, every financial statement, every connection mapped out like a conspiracy theorist's bulletin board. The stack of papers grew thick enough that I had to buy a second filing box to hold it all. But then what? Report it to the senior partners? Graham was a senior partner. His name was literally on the building directory. Report it to the Bar Association? With what proof that he'd done anything technically illegal? The clause itself was perfectly legal, predatory, unethical maybe, but legal. Unless I could prove Graham knew about Coastal's impending bankruptcy and deliberately concealed it. I had nothing but suspicions and circumstantial evidence. I sat in my apartment, a 1-bedroom in Port Charles's forgotten district where the steel mills used to run, staring at those boxes of evidence. My laptop cursor blinked in an empty email addressed to the entire partnership. I could expose it all, create enough smoke that someone would have to investigate. But I knew how that story ended. Whistleblowers didn't become heroes in corporate law. They became cautionary tales whispered about at Bar Association mixers. Then I had another thought. A dangerous thought. If the clause was legal, if the structure was already in place, what if someone else could benefit from it? What if the designated subsidiary vehicle could be redirected? I went back to the contract original, the physical copy in the records room. Section 47C, Sanquaris, had an interesting quirk. It referenced an attachment that defined the subsidiary vehicle, but the attachment itself was a separate document, filed independently. It could, theoretically, be amended without alerting the main contract parties, as long as the amendment was filed before the trigger event. My heart raced as I realized what I was considering. It would be fraud, technically. Or would it? I'd be using Graham's own trap against him, following the letter of the law he'd written. The subsidiary vehicle designation could be transferred. The contract allowed for it in case of administrative restructuring. All I needed was the right paperwork, the right timing, and the right kind of invisible. I looked at my reflection in my laptop screen. Tired eyes, coffee-stained blouse, the face of someone who'd been stepped on for 6 years. Administrative restructuring, I whispered to myself. It was 3 a.m. on a Thursday when I made my decision. Not to expose Graham. That would only destroy him. I wanted something more. I wanted to take what he'd built and make it mine. But first, I needed him to trust me completely. I needed to become so essential that he'd never see the betrayal coming. The next morning, I knocked on his office door with coffee and a practiced smile. "Graham," I said, "I've been thinking about the Meridian deal structure. There might be some additional opportunities we haven't explored." He looked up, interested for the first time in 6 years. "Sit down, Crowley. Tell me what you found." For 3 months, I played the perfect subordinate. I fed Graham insights about the Meridian deal's hidden potential, careful revelations that made him look brilliant in partner meetings. I started dressing better, speaking up just enough to be noticed, but not enough to threaten. Graham began calling me his protégé at firm events, the way you'd show off a well-trained dog. The trust was working. He gave me access to more sensitive files, included me in strategy sessions, even mentioned the possibility of fast-tracking me to senior associate. I smiled through it all, even as I documented every detail of his shell company network, every evidence of his prior knowledge about Coastal's finances. Then I made my mistake. It was a Friday afternoon in February. Graham was at his lake house, and I thought I had the executive floor to myself. I was in the records room, photographing additional contracts that showed a pattern. Graham had pulled this same maneuver twice before with smaller deals. My phone flashlight swept across the pages as I captured image after image. Finding anything interesting? I spun around. Harrison Pike, another senior partner, stood in the doorway. Harrison and Graham had the kind of rivalry that made office politics feel like blood sport. "Mr. Pike," I managed, my voice steady despite my racing pulse. "I'm reviewing historical precedents for the new Riverside development." He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "At 7 p.m. on a Friday? That's dedication. Or something else." I forced a laugh. "Graham wants a comprehensive analysis by Monday." "Graham!" Harrison said the name like it tasted bad. "You know, Crowley. Graham's been taking a lot of credit lately. The Meridian deal, particularly. Funny thing is, I remember seeing you here until dawn working on that contract." This was the moment I could flip, tell Harrison everything, use his rivalry with Graham as protection. But I knew Harrison Pike. He'd use the information to destroy Graham, then discard me just as quickly. I'd be collateral damage in their war. "Graham's been a valuable mentor," I said carefully. Harrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mentors. Right. Just remember. Crowley. Graham Tolland has never met a back he wouldn't stab to climb higher." He left, but the threat lingered. Harrison suspected something. By Monday morning, my paranoia was justified. Graham called me into his office, and his usual smug expression had hardened into something colder. "Harrison tells me you've been spending a lot of time in records," he said, not inviting me to sit. "Research for the Riverside. Don't." He held up a hand. "I've been thinking. Crowley, you've been very helpful lately. Maybe too helpful." You know what makes a good assistant? They know exactly enough to be useful, but not enough to be dangerous. He stood, walked to his window overlooking Port Charles's skyline. I'm recommending you for a transfer. Corporate litigation. They need someone detail-oriented. Corporate litigation, the firm's Siberia, where they sent attorneys to bill mind-numbing hours on document review until they quit. It was a demotion disguised as a lateral move. Graham, I don't understand. Have I done something? You've done excellent work, he interrupted, turning back with a smile that made my skin crawl. In fact, I'm going to make sure everyone knows how instrumental you were in identifying the opportunities in the meridian structure. Your name will be on all the internal documentation. My blood went cold. He was setting me up. If the clause ever came to light, if anyone investigated, my name would be all over the research. Graham would claim I'd found the loophole, that he'd just signed off on his subordinate's work. I'd be the one holding the smoking gun. That's very generous. I managed. I'm sending the email today. The transfer is effective next month. Oh, and Crowley, I'll need all your Meridian files. For the transition. I stood on numb legs, walked to the door. My hand was on the handle when he spoke again. One more thing. I've updated our document access protocols. Your keycard won't work for the executive floor after hours anymore. Security risk? You understand. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and left. Back in my closet office, I stared at the boxes of evidence hidden under my desk. Graham hadn't just outmaneuvered me, he'd weaponized my own investigation against me. In trying to build a case, I'd created a paper trail that led directly to me. Every login to the financial databases, every after-hours keycard swipe, every photograph saved to my phone, it all pointed to Madeline Crowley, disgruntled mid-level attorney who discovered a way to commit massive fraud. I had two options: accept the transfer and slowly disappear into corporate litigation purgatory, or fight back with the evidence I had and likely destroy myself in the process. That night, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine, staring at my laptop. The email to the State Bar Association was drafted, all my evidence attached. My finger hovered over send. Then I saw another email in my drafts, one I'd written weeks ago, but never sent. A resignation letter. I opened a new message instead, addressed to Graham. You win, I typed. I'll take the transfer. All Meridian files will be on your desk Monday morning. I hit send. Then I opened my phone and started deleting photos, but not all of them. Just the obvious ones. The ones they'd look for. The real evidence, the truly damaging material. I'd already uploaded to an encrypted cloud service under a different name. Graham thought he'd buried me, but he'd forgotten the first rule of contract law: always read the fine print. And the fine print of my employment agreement had a very interesting arbitration clause, one that kicked in after termination, one that allowed for discovery of all relevant firm documents. I wasn't done. I was just getting started. The transfer to corporate litigation lasted exactly 3 weeks before they destroyed me completely. It started small. A missing file that appeared in my desk drawer after security had been called. Then escalated to edited emails in my sent folder, messages I'd never written, offering to sell client information to competitors. By week 2, someone had planted a thumb drive in my laptop bag containing confidential merger documents from a case I'd never worked on. Graham was thorough. I had to give him that. The final blow came on a Wednesday morning. Helen from HR, flanked by 2 security guards, arrived at my cubicle in the litigation basement. Around me, dozens of attorneys pretended not to watch while documenting every second for the gossip mill. Ms. Crowley, we need you to come with us. The conference room they led me to had windows facing the entire floor, a fishbowl designed for public humiliation. Graham sat at the head of the table, Harrison Pike to his left, managing partner Richard Hallberg himself on the right. Madeline, Richard began, his voice dripping with manufactured disappointment. Serious allegations have been made regarding your conduct. Graham slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of emails, financial records, and, my stomach dropped, photographs of me in the records room after hours. Industrial espionage, Graham said simply. You've been documenting confidential client information, presumably to sell to competitors or start your own practice. That's ridiculous, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. Harrison leaned forward. We have time-stamped access logs showing you entering restricted areas. We have emails from your account soliciting interest from rival firms. Yo, those emails are fabricated. Are you suggesting someone hacked your firm account? Richard asked. That would be a serious security breach. We'd have to involve the FBI. The trap was perfect. Deny the emails, and they'd make it a federal case that would still destroy me. Accept them, and I'd be disbarred. Furthermore, Graham added, sliding another document forward. There's the matter of the meridian analysis. Your research into the deal structure, the extensive documentation you compiled, it suggests you were planning to exploit confidential information for personal gain. There it was. He turned my investigation of his fraud into evidence of my own supposed conspiracy. We're prepared to handle this quietly, Richard said. You resign immediately, surrender your law license voluntarily, and sign this non-disclosure agreement. In return, we won't pursue criminal charges or report this to the Bar Association. The NDA was 40 pages long. It essentially said I could never work in law again, never discuss anything related to Hallberg and Denton, and never challenge any narrative they chose to create about my departure. I need time to review this, I said. You have 10 minutes. Graham replied. Then we call the police. I signed it. What choice did I have? My hand shook as I wrote my name, each letter another nail in my professional coffin. They escorted me out like a criminal, security guards, a banker's box of personal items they'd already packed, employees lining the hallways to witness my disgrace. Someone had even called the local legal blogger. I saw him in the lobby, phone out, recording my walk of shame. By that evening, the story was everywhere in Port Charles legal circles. Mid-level attorney caught in espionage scheme. Graham was quoted calling it a betrayal of the highest order and praising the firm's swift action to protect client interests. My phone became a nightmare. Colleagues I'd known for years blocked me on LinkedIn. My law school alumni association sent a terse email about reviewing my membership status. My landlord called to say he'd received concerning information and wouldn't be renewing my lease. But the worst call came from my mother. Maddie, there's an article, she began, her voice small. It says you stole from your company, that you were selling secrets. Is it true? Mom, it's complicated. Your father is devastated. His daughter? A thief? How could you? I tried to explain, but the NDA choked the words in my throat. I couldn't tell her about Graham's fraud without violating the agreement and risking criminal prosecution. All I could say was, it's not what it seems. That's what guilty people always say, she replied, and hung up. I sat in my apartment, boxes already being packed for the eviction I knew was coming, and laughed. It wasn't a healthy sound. Graham hadn't just fired me, he'd salted the earth of my entire existence. My reputation, my relationships, my future, all meticulously destroyed in 3 weeks. My laptop sat open on the coffee table, the screen reflecting my face. Hollow eyes, unwashed hair, the look of someone who'd lost everything. The encrypted cloud service icon blinked in the corner, those photos and documents still waiting like sleeping weapons. But what good were weapons when you'd been neutralized as a threat? Nobody would believe me now. I was the disgraced attorney who'd tried to steal from her firm. Any accusation I made would sound like desperate retaliation from a caught criminal. I pulled up my bank account. 3 months of savings, maybe 4 if I lived on ramen. No firm would hire me. The NDA prevented me from even explaining the gap in my resume. I was professionally dead, socially radioactive, and financially drowning. That's when I saw the email. It was from an address I didn't recognize, Future Ventures, 47's Proton Mail. Com. The subject line read, regarding subsection 47, C. I. My blood froze. Someone knew about the clause. I opened it. Ms. Crowley, you're not the only one who reads fine print. If you're interested in discussing alternative applications of dormant contractual provisions, meet me at the Port Charles Public Library, 3rd floor, Local History section, Thursday at 3 p.m. Come alone. Bring nothing electronic. A friend who knows buried things can be resurrected. I read it 3 times. It could be a trap. Graham making sure I had no avenue of escape. Or it could be something else, someone else who'd noticed what Graham had done, someone who needed what I knew. I had nothing left to lose. Thursday at 3 p.m., I stood in the local history section between shelves of forgotten city records. The irony wasn't lost on me, another buried document about to change everything. Ms. Crowley. I turned. The woman standing there was elegant, mid-50s, with the kind of inherited wealth that whispered, rather than shouted. I recognized her from the society pages. Victoria Meridian, matriarch of Meridian Development. You know about the clause, she said. It wasn't a question. I can't discuss. Your NDA with Halberg and Denton doesn't cover communications with affected third parties seeking remediation of potential fraud, she interrupted. I had my lawyers check, very carefully. She pulled out a chair at a dusty reading table, gestured for me to sit. Graham Tolland thinks he's clever, she continued. But I've been in this business longer than he's been alive. I know when I'm being hunted. The question is, do you want revenge or do you want justice? What's the difference? She smiled then, sharp as a blade. Revenge destroys your enemy. Justice makes you rich while doing it. So tell me, Ms. Crowley, how would you like to help me bury Graham Tolland with his own shovel? Victoria Meridian's offer was elegant in its simplicity. Help her neutralize Graham's trap, and she'd fund my startup with the money Graham thought he'd steal from her. The clause triggers when Coastal Logistics declares bankruptcy, she said, sliding a folder across the library table. Which Graham expects within 6 months. But what if someone bought Coastal's debt first, restructured it, kept them barely alive just long enough for the 18-month window to expire? That would take millions, I said. I have millions. What I don't have is someone who understands Graham's entire scheme from the inside. She leaned back. But you're not thinking big enough, Ms. Crowley. Why stop at preventing his fraud when we could transform it into something useful? That night, in Victoria's private office overlooking Lake Erie, she laid out her real vision. She didn't just want to stop Graham, she wanted to revolutionize how contracts were written and reviewed. Every major deal has these buried clauses, she said. Lawyers like Graham betting against their own clients, hiding traps in legalese. What if there was technology that could find them, expose them, level the playing field? That would require sophisticated AI, natural language processing, machine learning trained on thousands of contracts. I have a team of developers from my son's failed tech startup. Brilliant coders, no direction. What they need is someone who understands both the legal architecture and the dirty tricks. Someone like you. ClauseTech was born in that moment, though we wouldn't file the incorporation papers for another month. Victoria would be the silent investor, her involvement hidden behind 3 layers of venture capital firms. I would be the founder, the face, the story of redemption that Silicon Valley loved. The whistleblower who built something better from the ashes of corruption. But first, I had to disappear. Victoria arranged everything. A sublet in Columbus under a corporate name. A consulting contract with one of her subsidiaries that required no actual work but provided enough income to survive. For 3 months, I lived like a ghost while we built the foundation. The developers, 5 burnt-out geniuses who tried to build an app for rating coffee shops, took to the concept immediately. We trained our first algorithm on the Meridian contract, teaching it to recognize the linguistic patterns that signaled hidden provisions. Then we fed it hundreds of public contracts from SEC filings, building a database of dirty tricks and their variations. Holy shit, Marcus, our lead developer, said one night as the system flagged its first novel trap in a contract we'd never seen before. This is like X-ray vision for legal documents. Meanwhile, Victoria quietly bought coastal logistics debt through intermediaries, keeping them on life support with strategic cash infusions. Graham watched his carefully planned bankruptcy timeline stretch and delay, no doubt frustrated but unable to act without exposing himself. The revenge was sweet, but building something meaningful was sweeter. We launched Clause Tech in beta 6 months after my disgrace. The marketing wrote itself. AI-powered contract analysis. Never miss a hidden clause again. Our first client was a small manufacturing firm in Akron who couldn't afford big law firm reviews. Our system found 7 problematic provisions in their vendor agreements, saving them potentially millions. Word spread through Ohio's business community like wildfire. Companies that had been burned by predatory contracts lined up for our services. We priced it at 1/10 of what traditional legal review cost, democratizing access to protection that had once been reserved for the wealthy. I kept my name off the marketing materials initially, but Victoria insisted we needed a founder story. People don't buy products, she said. They buy narratives. And yours, the attorney who sacrificed everything to expose corruption, who built technology to protect others from what happened to her. That's gold. The first interview was with TechCrunch. I sat in our cramped office in Columbus, wearing my only remaining suit, and told a carefully edited version of the truth. How I'd discovered problematic contract provisions at my former firm. How I'd tried to raise concerns. How I'd been forced out for asking too many questions. The NDA prevented me from naming Hallberg and Denton directly, but legal Twitter filled in the blanks within hours. From disgrace to disruption, how one lawyer's termination sparked a legal tech revolution. The headline read, Graham must have read it. I knew because Harrison Pike called me the next day. Interesting pivot, Crowley, he said. Graham's furious, says you're violating your NDA. I haven't mentioned the firm once, I replied carefully. No, but everyone knows. He wants to sue, but Richard won't let him. Too much attention. Bad for business. He paused. I always knew you were smarter than Graham gave you credit for, if you ever need additional funding. I hung up. Harrison's enemy of my enemy interest was exactly the kind of trap I'd learned to recognize. By month 8, Clause Tech had analyzed over $2 billion in contracts. We'd identified hundreds of buried provisions, saved companies millions, and started getting acquisition offers from larger legal tech firms. But I wasn't interested in selling. Not yet. Because Victoria and I had discovered something in those months of development. The patterns in Graham's contracts weren't unique. There was an entire network of lawyers across major firms using similar tactics, hiding similar traps, betting against their own clients. They had a private forum, encrypted communications, even a shared database of successful provisions. It's not just Graham, Victoria said, looking at the network analysis our AI had constructed. It's a conspiracy. And now we have proof. I stared at the screen showing connections between dozens of partners at top firms, all linked by suspicious contract patterns and shell company networks. We could expose them all, I said. Or, Victoria smiled. We could offer them a choice, clean up their acts and become Clause Tech clients, or watch their careers burn when we release what we know. That's extortion. That's business, the same kind they've been practicing for years. I thought about Graham, probably sitting in his corner office, watching his coastal logistics plan crumble, reading about Clause Tech's latest success, knowing I was behind it but unable to touch me without violating his own web of lies. Let's give them a month to decide, I said. After all, everyone deserves a chance at redemption. Victoria laughed. Spoken like someone who's found hers. But I hadn't. Not yet. Redemption would come when Graham's name was ruined like mine had been. When Hallberg and Denton's clients fled to firms that used Clause Tech for transparency. When the entire legal world knew that buried clauses could be resurrected and turned into weapons against those who'd hidden them. Clause Tech's rise was meteoric. Within 18 months, we'd gone from a 5-person startup in Columbus to a 40-employee company with offices in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Pittsburgh. Our AI had analyzed over $50 billion in contracts. Fortune wrote a profile titled "The Algorithm That's Terrifying Big Law." But Graham wasn't sitting idle. The first sign of his counterattack came through a LinkedIn message from Jessica Hartley, a junior associate I'd mentored years ago at Hallberg and Denton. "Maddie, be careful. Graham's been meeting with Rothberg and Associates. They're planning something." Rothberg and Associates, the legal industry's equivalent of hired killers, they specialized in destroying competition through patent trolling, regulatory manipulation, and strategic litigation. If Graham had hired them, he was done playing defense. Their attack came on 3 fronts simultaneously. First, a patent infringement lawsuit claiming our core algorithm violated a dormant patent Rothberg had quietly acquired. A patent filed in 2012 for automated document analysis that was so broad it could apply to virtually any legal tech. Fighting it would cost millions we didn't have. Second, a whisper campaign to our clients suggesting ClauseTech's AI might be storing and selling their confidential contract data. Completely false, but fears spread faster than fact in corporate boardrooms. Third, and most devastating, they found Jennifer Zhao, one of our developers who'd been struggling with gambling debts. They offered her $200,000 to inject malicious code into our system that would randomly flag standard clauses as suspicious, destroying our credibility. We caught Jennifer before she could deploy the code, but the damage was done. She'd already given Rothberg our development roadmap, our client list, even our funding structure. Graham knew Victoria Meridian was our backer. "He's going to expose our connection," Victoria said during an emergency meeting. "Make it look like ClauseTech was just a weapon in the Meridian coastal dispute. Your redemption story becomes a revenge plot." She was right. The narrative would shift from innovative disruption to corporate espionage. We'd lose everything. But then Marcus, our lead developer, had an idea that changed everything. "What if we open source it?" he said. "The entire algorithm. Give it away for free." The room went silent. "That's insane," Victoria said. "We'd destroy our own business model." "No," I said slowly. Understanding dawning. "We'd destroy theirs. If everyone has access to clause detection, if every small firm and solo practitioner can spot these traps, then the lawyers hiding them lose their advantage. Graham's entire practice model collapses." "But so does our revenue," Victoria pointed out. "Not if we pivot." Marcus continued. "We open source the basic detection algorithm but charge for enterprise features, integration, custom training, white labeling. We become the Android of legal tech. Free for individuals, profitable for corporations." It was brilliant, and it would infuriate Graham beyond measure. We announced the open source initiative at Legal Tech Conference in New York. I stood on stage in front of 800 lawyers and tech executives, many from firms that had rejected me after my disgrace. 18 months ago, I was destroyed for asking questions about hidden contract provisions. I began. Today, ClauseTech is giving everyone the power to ask those questions. As of this morning, our core detection algorithm is free, forever. The audience erupted, half applauded, the small firms in corporate counsel who'd been victimized for years. Half sat in stunned silence, the big law partners who realized their competitive advantage had just evaporated. Graham was in the third row. I saw his face cycle through rage, disbelief, and something that looked like fear. The aftermath was swift. Rothberg's patent lawsuit became irrelevant. You can't claim damages against free software. The whisper campaign backfired as thousands of individual lawyers started using ClauseTech and sharing their discoveries on legal Twitter. Hidden clauses were being exposed hourly, creating a transparency revolution that no single firm could stop. Within a week, Hallberg and Denton lost 3 major clients who discovered problematic provisions in their existing contracts, provisions that ClauseTech had flagged instantly. The legal press started investigating, finding patterns that suggested systematic client deception. But the killing blow came from an unexpected source: Jennifer Zhao. Racked with guilt and facing criminal charges for corporate espionage, decided to cooperate fully with authorities. She didn't just confess to the attempted sabotage, she gave them recordings of her meetings with Rothberg, including one where Graham explicitly discussed destroying that bitch Crowley and outlined his entire shell company network. The FBI raided Halberg and Denton on a Tuesday morning. I watched from my office window in Columbus as news helicopters circled their Port Charles tower. Graham was led out in handcuffs, the same walk of shame I'd endured, but with federal agents instead of security guards. Harrison Pike called me that afternoon. "Congratulations, Crowley. You won." "This isn't about winning," I said, though we both knew I was lying. "The firm's finished. We'll be in bankruptcy by month's end. Graham's looking at 10 years minimum for fraud and conspiracy." He paused. "You know, we have some excellent attorneys who'll need new opportunities. Tech must be hiring." "Send me resumes," I said. "Our AI will review them for hidden red flags." He actually laughed before hanging up. Victoria found me that evening on our office balcony, looking out at Columbus's modest skyline. "The 18-month window for the Meridian Clause expires next week," she said. "Graham's trap will close on empty air. Coastal Logistics is stable, Halberg and Denton is destroyed, and Tech is valued at $400 million. How does victory feel?" I thought about it. 6 years at Halberg and Denton being invisible, the humiliation of my termination, the months of building in secret. Graham's face when he realized his own weapons had been turned against him. "Like justice," I said. "Expensive, complicated, time-consuming justice. The best kind." Victoria agreed. "So what's next?" I pulled up my phone, showing her a map dotted with red pins, every major law firm where our AI had detected systematic clause manipulation. "Graham was just the beginning," I said. "There's an entire industry built on buried provisions and hidden traps. Tech is going to expose them all." Victoria smiled. "From disgrace to disruption to dominance. I like it." Down in Port Charles, Halberg and Denton's lights were going dark floor by floor as employees fled the sinking ship. Graham's corner office, where this all began, was already empty. But up here in Columbus, Tech blazed with activity. Developers coding, lawyers training our AI, customer success teams onboarding the flood of new users. We'd built something that couldn't be destroyed by a single man's vendetta or a firm's reputation. We'd built transparency. And that, more than any revenge, was Graham's true nightmare. Graham's trial was set for 6 months out. But I wasn't waiting for legal justice. I had something more elegant planned, a final trap using his own methodology. Through Victoria's connections, I learned that Graham, out on bail and desperate for money to pay his defense team, was trying to sell his stake in various shell companies, including Portside Holdings, the very entity meant to receive the Meridian windfall. His lawyers were shopping it quietly, looking for buyers who didn't know about the criminal charges. I created my own shell company, Resurrection Ventures LLC, registered in Delaware like all of Graham's. Through intermediaries, I offered to buy Portside Holdings for $2 million, cash, no questions asked. Graham was suspicious but desperate. His legal fees were mounting, and frozen assets meant he couldn't access his hidden wealth. The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a conference room at the Columbus Marriott. Graham looked diminished, his Armani replaced with off-the-rack, his confidence eroded by months of federal investigation. "Ms. Crowley," he said when I walked in. "I should have known." "You should have," I agreed, sitting across from him. "But desperation makes us all stupid. You can't seriously expect me to sell to you. Actually, I expect you to sell to Resurrection Ventures, which is offering above market value for a company that will be worthless once you're convicted." I slid the purchase agreement across the table. $2 million. Enough for a decent defense team. Maybe get you 5 years instead of 10. He read through it, looking for the trap he knew must be there. But the agreement was clean, a straightforward purchase of his ownership stake in Portside Holdings. "What's your game?" he asked. "No game. I want Portside. You need money. Simple transaction." What Graham didn't know was that I'd already negotiated with the federal prosecutor. In exchange for testimony about the broader network of corrupt lawyers, they'd agreed to let certain civil matters proceed separately. Specifically, they wouldn't challenge the validity of existing contracts, including the Meridian Agreement. Graham signed. He had no choice. 2 weeks later, I executed the next phase. Using Portside Holdings' ownership rights, I filed an amendment to the subsidiary vehicle designation in the Meridian contract, perfectly legal under Section 47C, Bink's administrative restructuring provision. Instead of Portside receiving the profit rights if Coastal went bankrupt, the benefits would flow to the Claustech Foundation, a nonprofit I'd established to provide free legal services to small businesses. But here was the beautiful part. I wasn't going to let Coastal go bankrupt. Instead, I approached them with a proposal. Claustech would acquire Coastal Logistics, integrate our AI into their operations to optimize their supply chain, and transform them from a failing subsidiary into a profitable enterprise. The Meridian board, led by Victoria, approved enthusiastically. Graham watched from house arrest as news broke of the acquisition. The company he'd planned to destroy became Claustech's first major expansion beyond legal tech. The clause he'd buried to steal millions became the mechanism for funding free legal services for businesses that couldn't afford protection from predators like him. The press conference was held at Coastal's Cleveland headquarters. I stood at the podium, announcing the creation of 200 new jobs and the launch of the Claustech Foundation. Every trap hidden in a contract represents someone's livelihood at risk, I said to the assembled media. Today, we're turning one of those traps into a safety net. A reporter raised her hand. Ms. Crowley, Graham Tolland's defense team claims you manipulated this entire situation for personal gain. How do you respond? Graham Tolland wrote a clause designed to profit from a company's destruction. I used that same clause to save the company and fund free legal services. If that's manipulation, then I'm guilty of manipulating his weapon into a tool for justice. The real manipulation, though, was still coming. Graham's trial began 3 weeks later. I was the prosecution's star witness, walking the jury through the labyrinth of shell companies, the predatory clauses, the systematic deception. But the crescendo came when I revealed the network analysis our AI had performed. This wasn't one bad actor, I testified, showing the web of connections on the courtroom screen. This was an organized conspiracy involving partners at 17 major firms, all using variations of the same hidden clause schemes. Graham's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The Justice Department announced a wider investigation that afternoon. Within days, lawyers across the country were fleeing firms, destroying documents, pointing fingers at each other. Graham was convicted on all counts. At sentencing, the judge specifically cited the breathtaking scope of deception and the perversion of legal ethics for personal enrichment. 12 years in federal prison, no possibility of early release for 5. As they led him away, Graham looked at me. For a moment, I expected rage or threats. Instead, he almost smiled. The clause, he said. You used my own clause. I learned from the best. I replied. That night, Victoria and I stood in Claustech's new headquarters, the top 3 floors of a Columbus high-rise, with a view of the whole city. You could have destroyed him simply, she said. Why the elaborate reversal? Because simple destruction is forgettable. But taking his own trap and turning it into salvation for the company he meant to destroy? That's a warning to every lawyer thinking about burying clauses. We're not just watching. We're waiting to turn their weapons against them. She raised her champagne glass. To justice served cold. To clauses that fund startups, I countered. We drank as the city lights sparkled below. Somewhere in federal processing, Graham was learning his cell assignment. Somewhere in Port Charles, Halberg and Denton's building was being converted to condos. And somewhere in America, a small business owner was uploading a contract to Claustech's free platform, about to discover a hidden trap that would have cost them everything. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't just success. It was systematic, poetic, and profitable success that transformed your enemy's weapons into your foundation. Graham had taught me that everything could be hidden in plain sight. I'd taught him that everything hidden could be resurrected. 5 years after Graham's conviction, I stood in my office at Claustech's new Manhattan headquarters, 40 stories above the city where American corporate law was born and continuously reinvented. We'd gone public 6 months earlier at a $3.2 billion valuation. The prospectus had called us the company that democratized legal defense through artificial intelligence. The Wall Street Journal ran a profile. From disgrace to disruption, how Madeline Crowley built an empire on buried clauses. But I wasn't looking at stock prices or press clippings. I was holding a simple manila folder, weathered and coffee-stained, the original Meridian contract with Section 47C, SATCCs, highlighted in fading yellow. Victoria entered without knocking, a privilege she'd earned as board chair and the woman who'd believed in revenge as investment strategy. Nostalgic? She asked. Instructive, I corrected. Every month, someone sends me a contract with a new type of buried clause. The lawyers keep evolving, finding new ways to hide their traps. And we keep exposing them. The foundation has saved small businesses over $400 million this year alone. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Port Charles in the distance across Lake Erie. The Hallberg and Denton building was luxury condos now, its law firm legacy erased except for a small plaque in the lobby that no one read. Graham was 3 years into his sentence, teaching fellow inmates basic legal literacy, court-mandated community service that must have tasted like ash in his mouth. Harrison Pike called again, Victoria mentioned. He wants to know if you'll speak at the Ohio Bar Association's Ethics Symposium. Harrison, who'd survived the firm's collapse by immediately turning state's evidence, had reinvented himself as an ethics consultant. The irony was almost artistic. Tell him yes, I said. I'll bring the original contract. Show them what one buried clause can become. That evening, I walked through Claustech's offices. 300 employees now, with branches in 12 cities. The walls displayed framed contracts, each one a trap we'd exposed, a company we'd saved, a predator we'd stopped. The Meridian contract held the place of honor, right inside the entrance. Marcus found me in the AI lab, where our latest algorithm was learning to detect a new pattern of deception involving cryptocurrency provisions. You know what I realized, he said, not looking up from his code. We're not really a tech company. We're a trust company. We're building trust in a system designed for betrayal. He was right. Every contract was ultimately about trust, and every buried clause was a betrayal of that trust. We'd built an empire on exposing those betrayals, on dragging them from the shadows into burning daylight. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother, who'd long since forgiven my disgrace once the truth emerged. Saw you on 60 Minutes. Your father would have been proud. He'd died 2 years ago, just months before Graham's conviction. But he'd lived long enough to see my vindication, to understand that sometimes destruction was just construction in disguise. I returned to my office to find a package on my desk. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of the original sticky note Graham had left on the Meridian contract years ago. Clean this up. Below it, in fresh ink, someone had written, "You did." No signature, but the federal prison postmark told me everything. Even now, Graham couldn't resist having the last word. I smiled, then fed the paper into the shredder. He was wrong. I hadn't cleaned anything up. I'd exposed it all. Every buried clause, every hidden provision, every trap disguised as typography. I'd taken his masterpiece of deception and turned it into the foundation for an empire built on transparency. The sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the glass towers gold and shadow. Somewhere, a small business owner was uploading a contract to our platform, about to discover a clause that could have destroyed them. Somewhere else, a lawyer was deleting a deceptive provision, knowing our AI would catch it. And somewhere in federal prison, Graham Tolland was teaching inmates to read the fine print, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale. I picked up the original Meridian contract one last time, running my finger over section 47C. E. Such a small thing. A few sentences buried on page 247 of a document no one was supposed to read carefully. But those sentences had destroyed a corrupt law firm, sent a predator to prison, funded a billion-dollar company, and revolutionized how contracts were written and reviewed. All because someone had finally read what was buried in plain sight. I locked the contract in my safe and turned off the lights. Tomorrow, there would be new clauses to expose, new traps to dismantle, new empires to build from the ashes of deception. But tonight, I stood in my tower built on transparency, looking out at a city full of secrets, knowing that every buried clause was just another startup waiting to be funded. The clause that Graham had buried hadn't just funded my startup, it had funded my resurrection, my revenge, and ultimately, my redemption. And in the end, that was the most perfect justice of all. Not just winning, but winning with the very weapon meant to destroy you. Buried in plain sight, resurrected in blazing glory. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed this revenge tale, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts on Maddie's journey. What would you have done in her position? Let me know in the comments.